Greetings again. This is Tiara speaking. We are now heading into our third session of the day, and we hope that you are enjoying the program thus far. As a quick reminder, to view both the presenter and the interpreter, along with any presentation materials, please make sure that the gallery view is selected on your personal device. Now that we have that all set, I am happy to introduce our next presenters who are going to talk to us about digital accessibility. Please join me in welcoming Phil Deaton from the University of Michigan and Josie Davidson from Michigan State University. Phil and Josie, floor is now yours.
Thanks so much, Tiara. So if you can go ahead and advance the next slide, please, here. Oops. I guess I was not ready for that yet. But anyway, my name is Phil Deaton, and I work at the University of Michigan doing digital accessibility work. I'm just going to do a short visual description, recognizing there's different opinions on how to describe ourselves. So I'm a white man with curly brown hair, wearing a green sports jacket and a black shirt. Just a quick note, I'm recovering from being sick this past few days, so I'll be following my bullet points a little bit more closely than usual today to keep myself on track. But it's great to be here today celebrating the 34th anniversary of the ADA with my colleague from Michigan State University. So thanks to Tierra for reaching out to us and MDCR for hosting this event. And over to you, Josie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Josie Davidson. I'm the Accessibility Review Coordinator over at Michigan State University over our Office for Civil Rights. And a description of myself, I'm a white woman with brownish blonde hair that goes just below my shoulders. I'm wearing light blue glasses and a blue and white striped shirt with maize flowers on it.
Yes, we are definitely trying to represent each other's universities a little bit, just to be a little playful today.
Yes.
So a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to start with a quick note on disability language before we move into a brief intro of what digital accessibility is, and then do a brief overview of two big digital accessibility wins this year, one of which involving the ADA regulations and another involving Section 504 regulations. And then we're going to talk about applying digital accessibility in a few different areas. And we'll close out with a couple of resources that you can use. Most of the resources we found, I believe, are free. Just a note regarding these resources, these are references that we found to be helpful. They're not necessarily an endorsement for any organization or their services. Just got to get that out of the way. If you can advance to the next slide, please. All right, so for this slide, we have a title reading "Things Are Looking Up" with the U and the P capitalized, and a photograph of Lake Superior overlooking pictured rocks in Grand Island in the Upper Peninsula, as you may have guessed from the poor wordplay. I took this photograph in June of this year and wrote down a few notes about a trip that I took. So I've lived in Michigan over 20 years, and it seemed like a good time to do my first trip to the Upper Peninsula this past June. And I did a lot of the standard things the starstruck tourist does when they're going to the UP and seeing all the natural beauty up there. But that I also did a lot of the things that an accessibility advocate does, which is consider the world around us with disability in mind. Several times I was really impressed by thoughtful accessibility options at parks and places that we visited. We saw a lot of trail chairs and accessible boardwalks and lookout spaces, well-labeled maps and trails. We even saw use of tactile pavings that are truncated domes as a universal design feature for sighted folks at a dark park. We saw lifts and pools, accessible parking, ramps inside and outside of buildings in small towns. And, you know, while we saw many ways that these things could be improved, we also were grateful for all the work that disability advocates in the state of Michigan have done to improve accessibility in this regard. All these examples of physical accessibility are really heartening to see when you're out and about in the world. Many folks have been advocating for these things and using laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act to do so. In the same way folks have worked to adjust physical spaces and attitudes and programs and benefits to better work for disabled people and continue to need to do so, we also must consider the ways that digital spaces and the policies, programs, and services that those spaces support are accessible as well. So on my trip, as you may guess, I use digital services every step of the way when I did have a signal or Wi-Fi. And I used it to find attractions, read and leave reviews, find restaurants, find my way around town. Um, and the reason I bring this up and kind of start off with this stuff is just to kind of highlight how important digital accessibility is, not because it's digital and technology is interesting or innovative, but because it's important and imperative to be used in our everyday lives and also in our everyday recreation and travel. So hopefully I'm speaking to a group of folks that already agrees with this. But one of the themes of this presentation is that digital accessibility is important, and that's kind of what we'll talk about next. So if you can advance to the next slide, please. Before we dive into that, I do want to do one quick note on disability language. In this presentation, you'll notice that we may be talking using identity first, disabled person, or person first language, person with a disability. I'm just dropping this slide in here because we wanted folks to be aware of when you might want to use these different variations of language, and just because it's important to recognize and respect people's individual language preferences. So that's the gist of why that's there. And I will turn it back over to Josie to talk about digital accessibility.
Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So our title is What is Digital Accessibility? So I'm going to read out the definition because I feel like it's important. Digital accessibility is the practice of ensuring that technology and digital content is usable by everyone, including people with disabilities, whether that person is using assistive technology or not. So what this means is that all the digital services, products that we use on a day-to-day need to work for people with disabilities with their assistive technologies. So this can mean things like text-to-speech, magnification programs, as well as just inherent usability of products. I'm sure we've all downloaded that app, thought it was going to be great, and then find out they don't know how to change a setting, don't know how to do this, and it's not really an accessibility issue, it's more a usability issue, but it can then turn into an accessibility issue. So that is our definition. Can we go to the next slide, please? So things to be mindful of, we have non-technical examples and some technical examples. Non-technical examples include things like providing captions for videos or ASL interpreters for videos and commemoration events like this, making sure your text has strong contrast against a background. I'm sure we've all seen that light gray on white background and wondered why that design choice was made. Using clear and understandable link names, not having a bunch of click here, click here, click here links that go to 5 different places, avoiding color alone for meaning, for emphasis, or just to show where to click, like click the green button, not the most accessible. And error identification, I'm sure we've all tried to make a password, come to find out, oh, you need a character. Oh, nope, you need some capitalization in there. And so making sure those messages are also described to folks who maybe can't see the message on the screen. And then some technical examples are alt text, so alternative text for images. This is very important. Headings, using semantic headings, not just hitting that font size up a little higher or making it bold, using heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and going in a sequential order. And then also form labels to make sure people actually know what data you want in your forms and they can fill that out properly. Can we go to the next slide, please? So negative impacts of digital accessibility issues. Impacts can include like users not being able to access products or services, users cannot independently complete transactions or access their financial records, or just not even being able to apply for jobs, scholarships, or other programs that could benefit them greatly. And then some larger implications, just a lack of agency or a lack of choice. When things are inaccessible, it really widows down what services that people can use, and that really limits their overall agency, unfortunately. Lack of independence, like if someone needs to use public transit, maybe the public transit app isn't accessible, that's going to severely lack their ability just to get around town. And then also unemployment is unfortunately a big one that people have to face, with a rate of 7.2% for people with disabilities versus 3.5% for non-disabled individuals. So there is a big disparity there, and unfortunately part of that is due to digital accessibility. Next slide, please. Phil?
Sorry, I was trying to find the mute button on my other monitor over here. All right, so I mentioned that there were kind of two big digital accessibility wins this year in the United States. And we just got done immediately prior to the discussion that Tyra had on service animals. We just got done listening to a little bit of a history about disability in the US prior to the ADA. What's neat is that advocates in the US and around the US continue to advance disability rights every day. And so there's been some changes recently to the ADA Title II regulations, which has been really big for digital accessibility. So in April of this year, a big update was introduced to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which introduced Subpart H for that title. You don't need to remember the subpart number or subpart letter, rather. But this is dealing with web and mobile accessibility. This has been a really long time coming for folks who are a little bit aware of some of the history of digital accessibility, particularly web and mobile accessibility. The Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education as well, since the late 90s, have been saying that digital accessibility should be conceived as a responsibility under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, with this Subpart H being added to the ADA Title II regulations, we're seeing some more clarity around the standard that we are to use to look at web and mobile accessibility, which Josie will talk about on the next slide. And additionally, the strategies that we should use to employ that standard and think about digital accessibility in public organizations, which is, Title II primarily covers state and local government organizations. So just a few notes on this regulation update, because I don't want to bore you with regulation updates. The Title II update does place some onus on public entities to obviously have digitally accessible content and technology. So we see that larger public entities have until 2026 to comply with this rule, and smaller entities under 50,000 constituents in size have until April 2027. It's probably worth noting that many public entities in the US have already been trying to do digital accessibility work, not just the state of Michigan, Michigan State, or University of Michigan. Many other public entities across the US have been doing this work. But this regulatory update does give us a better lever for pushing private companies that create websites and mobile applications for us, for example, to create accessible output. Because we can just point to the regulation here and say, look, this is very clearly applies to us. We have a limited timeline. We are, this has to be more accessible. Also, what this regulatory update does provide a lever for is individuals who are wanting to report issues that they encounter when interacting with public organizations that may not have as much infrastructure around digital accessibility. I think you're going to see a lot of small and larger public organizations add more capabilities to respond to feedback from people with disabilities that they do receive. Obviously, with the regulation passing, we're not going to see everything become immediately more accessible, particularly as private suppliers may not necessarily be prepared to meet these standards either, and they do not necessarily have the same onus on them to meet these standards unless they do business with public entities. But we have this April 2026 timeline, and it's really going to push a lot of state, local governments, also public universities and community colleges to do better in this area and to invest more resources in these areas. Not that any of them are necessarily doing great or poorly. It's just that it's going to give us more opportunity to see other public entities kind of step up and be more prepared to work on these issues. I'm just looking back at my notes a little bit here. So it's definitely important to keep accessibility in mind when you are working with to procure technology that is produced by like private suppliers, because one of the best ways that we can protect and make sure that we're providing accessible technology is in those contracts and is in those discussions with those private companies that again do not necessarily have that standard applied to them. Within the new update, there are a few exceptions to content that may be covered by the standard, but it's worth pointing out that standard provisions for the ADA require accommodations to be considered within those exceptions. So that's definitely a thing to keep in mind. So there are some exceptions, but we're even if there is an exception that you can apply to an individual technology, you may still have to make that technology accessible or provide an accommodation upon that accommodation request. So that's all I wanted to talk about with Title II. This is a really cool, big new update, something that digital accessibility advocates have been waiting for so long. But there is another update, which I'll chat about a little bit more later. But I did mention that there's a standard that these updates require be used, and that is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. And I'm going to turn it back over to Josie to talk about that. Over to you, Josie.
Hello, yes, standards, everyone's favorite. Can we go to the next slide, please? So WCAG 2.1, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, this is standards 2.1, came out in June 5th of 2018. So it came out a couple of years ago. There is a newer standard that came out a little more recently, but this is the standard that federal government has decided to land on. It's very well known across the accessibility field, especially the digital accessibility field, with some choosing the 2.2, the newer standard, some choosing this standard. There was a 2.0, but that's not important anymore, I guess. So it consists of 78 success criteria, which are divided into A, AA, and AAA. It just depends on how deep, how technical you want to get to. Most agencies, universities aim for a AA compliance standard. If you really want to go above and beyond, you can go for AAA. It's extra stars for you, more accessibility. I feel the need to also mention that the standard is a minimum accessibility standard. The goal is always to go above and beyond and create the best experiences and most accessible experiences possible for individuals. So this is just a baseline standard we all want to get to, hopefully all moving much higher than this. It is split into 4 different sections very broadly, and I find that it really helps contextualize the standards and how you can really think about them. What are they really looking at from a high level? And it's an acronym called POUR, P-O-U-R. It stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable is, can a user even perceive this information? Information user interface components must be presented to users in a way that they can perceive. So a good example of this is if you have an image, you want to provide alternative text for that image. Otherwise, individuals who might have trouble seeing it or not being able to see it at all, they do not know what that image is of or the context or content of it. Then operable, user interface components and navigation must be operable. Some individuals use screen readers or navigate with only their keyboard. We don't want to just make it so people who use mice, can interact with elements on the screen. Anybody should be able to plug anything into their computer and be able to use it. Understandable information and operation of the user interface must be understandable. So this is I guess a complex way to say you just want to make sure people can go through your website, know what's happening, know where to put information, know what information is being asked for, and they don't need to be hunting around and looking for explanations to figure out what the heck is going on. And then robust content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. So this means that, like I was saying before, you want to be able to, for users to bring their own assistive technology, have it work with your interface, whatever product you have, and have a good experience. And that is WCAG. I'll get a little bit more into it later and contextualize it with different examples, but at a high level, this is the standard we have been given. Phil, I'm gonna throw it to you.
Thanks, Josie. All right, so we mentioned there was two big wins this year in the regulation space around digital accessibility. The other one, this is actually much more quick for me to report on. But on May 1st, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services actually updated the Section 504 regulations. This was a much larger update than just digital accessibility. So I hope you'll check out the rest of the update. I believe we've included a link to the Federal Register, and there's a good press release from HHS on this, which I think we linked to as well in our resources, which gives you the short, do not want to have to read hundreds of pages version of this. But what's important here is that Section 504 was updated, and it also is requiring WCAG 2.1 compliance in programs that receive federal financial assistance. It really mirrors the work of the Title II regulation update, the ADA Title II regulation update, that is, which I think is important to note because we're seeing the federal government kind of put forth a concerted effort to really push this WCAG 2.1 standard. And this is really good news. This also means that in healthcare spaces, you should also expect and ask for increased digital accessibility as you find issues, whether you're an advocate or a person with a disability that is impacted by these issues for whatever reason, whether that's getting to the appointment, paying your invoice, whatever. We hope that this is a lever to encourage increased digital access. So yeah, that one's a little bit quicker. You'll notice again that private companies do not necessarily have these directives yet. That said, many companies that do business internationally are scaling up around digital accessibility due to the European Accessibility Act, which also uses the same standard, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. So yeah, it's good to hear that there are more motivators pushing folks to include digital accessibility in their work. And Josie and I were actually just recently at a meeting of Big Ten universities to discuss digital accessibility. And we met with some suppliers in a certain area that work with universities often, and they mentioned that the European Accessibility Act was a great motivator for them as well, in addition to needing to comply with the policies and procedures that we establish because of things like ADA Title II. Anyway, though, that's enough of the legal stuff. If you can actually advance to the next slide. Yes, beyond the legal stuff. We really think it's important to do digital accessibility work for a variety of reasons. We touch on the legal and regulatory aspects because these are oftentimes giving folks, individuals with disabilities, tools in order to advocate for their needs. If you are someone who is joining and is considering reasons to do this work, we hope that you'll think about broadening your reach, reaching your constituents more effectively, more respectfully in the ways that they want to be reached, and being mindful of their privacy. We hope that you'll think about how you can meet the web and digital best practices that are out there. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, I think you talked about this, Josie, but is a international standard provided by the Worldwide Web Consortium, which is always hard to say. particularly if one is recovering from being sick. But this group also puts out many standards for things. And it's a group of folks that's really mindful about what is the best way to utilize the web to communicate, uh, with our audiences. And also, we think it's important to just be inclusive, ensure that folks with disabilities are prioritized as part of your business practices, as part of what you're doing, and are in conversations about what your business is doing, and that you are bringing up the needs of people with disabilities in conversation. So that is definitely very important. And we hope that you will not just think about laws and regulations or the absence of some of them that aren't quite there yet. When you're doing this work, we hope that you will think about these other aspects as well. So I'm going to actually transition it back over to Josie to talk about some of our next content.
Hello again, everybody. So engaging in digital accessibility. One of the things that we want to prioritize is doing it proactively. A lot of times we think that, or people think that this is something that can just be added on. We build an app, we build something out, a service, whatever it is, and then we can just add accessibility in at the end. But that has actually proven to be a lot more costly, take a lot more time, and just overall be a bit cumbersome for everybody. So we recommend thinking about it in the forefront and building everything with it in mind, because it offers a much better experience for everybody involved, both the people building and the end product end users. So we have some examples, including the guidelines, of course. You're going to see that a lot, but then also making sure your video content is captioned, you're providing text alternatives for promotional material, and just, we'll go into more detail later. And then also responsively, if you have customers or constituents that give you feedback regarding your accessibility, consider how you can improve it using media or documents or applications. It's just important that you're providing people with the best experience. And I would like to highlight as well that a lot of times accessibility and usability go hand in hand. Even though you might not identify as somebody who has a disability, believe it or not, you still benefit from a lot of these regulations that Phyllis have talked about and the guidelines when it is applied properly, because there are so many things that are frustrating out there to use, and that's because they're not built accessibly. So can we go to the next slide, please? And I'll provide some examples. So digital accessibility and websites. That's a very broad topic. There's many websites out there. So I just highlighted a few at the top, and these are just some example guidelines that would apply in these areas. So one thing you want to do is ensure that all your content can be reached with a keyboard. The main way that is done with the tab and then shift tab keys. So tab will progress you down the page, shift tab backwards up the page. And you want to make sure that users can interact with all like buttons, links, form elements, anything that you can touch with your mouse on the screen should also go with your keyboard. And then also making sure your text has a high enough contrast. 4.5 to 1 is the number. I know that sounds a bit arbitrary, but there are tools that can help you check for that. So it's not just eyeballing it. So the specific standards that map to those, there's 2.1.1 keyboard. I'm not going to read that standard because it's a little dense, but it's essentially saying all functionality should be usable with a keyboard. And then we have 1.4.3, which is contrast minimum. So there is a contrast maximum, that is a AAA standard, but so contrast minimum, this applies to all of the text on your screen. There is a bit of some caveats for it. For large text, it's a 3 to 1 ratio as opposed to 4.5 to 1. That's just because the text is larger. Incidental, interesting word choice, but this is for like images of text, logo, word marks, things like that. And so like logo types is the second one. We generally advise against images of text, but we do understand that sometimes there are specific use cases that require it. So those are some of the little caveats, but an example for websites. Can we go to the next slide, please? Content. So I'm differentiating between your overall website and then the actual content you put on your website. So content, you want to use proper structure. So making sure you're using proper headings, like I was saying, like 1, 2, 3, 4 to divide up your content. You also want to make sure you're using bullets. Don't just hit the little dash and then tab to make it look like a bullet. You want to actually hit that bullet button in whatever your editing software is, so that way it shows up as bullets. And then you also want to provide alternative text for images, or I should add, mark them as decorative if they are not, if they're just decorative, I guess. If they're just there to look pretty and they serve no content, structural, anything, then you can mark it as decorative. And so the success criteria that map to those is 1.3.1, info and relationships. This is kind of a big one, which is information structure or relationships is conveyed through presentation. Oh my God, I'm messing up my words here. I'm so sorry. Conveyed through presentation can be programmatically determined or are available in text. I know that sounds weird and I probably read it wrong, but it's pretty much saying that a user going through your website, content, anything should understand the structure just inherently from having that semantic markup. It shouldn't just all look like plain text. Like if I just read a book to you or an article to you and I just read it plainly, I did not tell you what was a heading, what was like what the different things or structure were. I just read it plain is how it would read to someone potentially using a screen reader. And then we have 1.1.1, which is the very first standard, which is alternative text. I say with some exceptions because there are some, but you can look at the standard for those. But that's pretty much saying write alt text for your images that describe what the image conveys. If it's there for a certain reason, make sure that you're conveying that reason. You're not just saying, this is a picture of a turtle. Okay, why did you put a picture of a turtle? Is it a specific type of turtle? Does the turtle have specific markings you're trying to highlight? Like, why is the image there? Include that in your alt text. If it is just a pretty turtle to be a pretty turtle, you can mark that as decorative. Move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, documents. I have an internal beef with PDFs, but I won't bring that up here. So make sure you use rendered text or images of text. The reason I don't like PDFs, they're generally a flat document that is not rendered text. You have to do some extra work to get it there. But Word documents are inherent rendered text. Like you can go, you can highlight it all, it's there. And then, so recommending that over like a PDF, OCR scan your PDFs, so that kind of makes it rendered text. And then utilize built-in accessibility checkers. There's some on not Word products, Microsoft products, including Word. PowerPoint has a built-in one, Excel has a built-in one, etc. Adobe Acrobat Pro, the paid version, has a built-in accessibility checker. Unfortunately, the free version of Adobe does not. And then the criteria that map to some of those, we have 1.4.5 images of text. So this is where we get into if you need an image of text, you are allowed to use it, but there are specifications around it. So you want to provide accurate alt text, needs to be customizable, essential, etc. And then I have contrast minimum on here again. I'm sorry, I should have picked a different one, but it's your color contrast standard applies to documents as well. So 4.5 to 1, large text is 3 to 1. Incidentals, logo types, we covered that. But documents are very similar to content, but there are just some more things you have to think about in terms of the format in which you are providing your document to individuals, because PDFs, unfortunately, a lot of times if you just export your Word document to a PDF document, it just kind of flattens it into almost an image, and then you have to rebuild out that accessibility and tell the program, this is a heading, this is an image, these are bullet points, and it doesn't just automatically come over. So that's why they're a little more complex. And that's documents. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, these are our training and resources. I don't think I need to read through them. Phil, what do you think?
I can read through some of them a little bit if
Okay.
you'd like.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a link here to the Web Content 2.1 accessibility guidelines. This stuff sounds kind of dense, but there's actually a lot of really good like learning materials attached to all the different tests and things that you need to check for to comply with WCAG 2.1. And we really recommend getting in there and checking it out. Like even if you're not technical, not super web savvy, you'll be able to like follow along with. So staying informed about WCAG 2.1 is pretty important, especially if you work at a public entity or want to do business with one, since we're all really thinking about digital accessibility quite a lot at this point in time. What are some of the other resources here? We've got a fact sheet from the new ADA Title II update. So this goes into a little bit of detail about what was updated, why. You can also read the new update on the Federal Register. I don't know if I recommend that one because there's a lot to it. But what's important is that there was a lot of public comments provided on the ADA Title II regulation update. This basically there was a notice that they were going to be updating the regulation. And there were a lot of comments provided, and the Department of Justice answers all the questions and comments that they received as best as they can. And I thought it was all really defensible. And I was super encouraged by some of the changes personally that we saw in the newer regulation release. And then these next couple ones, I think these next 4 resources and 5 resources actually are just areas where you can go to learn more about digital accessibility. I believe that I know for sure that the first 4 are free options, um, and the Coursera option, Josie.
I believe it's free. I tried very hard to only find free, open to the public options for training.
Yep. So we know this stuff sounds confusing to y'all, but we hope that you will be excited that there's a lot of work going on in the digital accessibility space, and be intrigued enough by this to check out some of these resources.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Phil and Josie, for that enlightening presentation and for the reminder that it is important to design with accessibility in mind. So far today, all of the sessions have been amazing, but I think it is time for a short break. Let's all step away for a few minutes and return at 11:15 a.m. for our final session, which you do not want to miss. So we'll see you guys back at 11:15 a.m. Feel free to stay logged on. Again, we'll see you back at 11:15 a.m. Thank you.